Of course, we have to begin today by talking about the tragic news, the passing of Jay Briscoe. And to do that with me, of course, the leader of the cult of Cornette, Mr. Jim Cornette.
Well, shit, I didn't know how I was going to start this to begin with, but now I'm just flummoxed. I wish sometimes, Brian, we were like normal people. Instead of doing a podcast, when something really bad happens, we can just avoid human contact for a month or so and eat a lot of greasy food. And, but we've got to talk about this right after it happens, because same thing I said with Bobby Eaton. If we don't do it now, we can't ever do another show, because that's the first thing we got to talk about. It's that important. And a lot of times when shit like this happens, even if you really like or love the person or have known them however long, it's wrestling, folks. Let's face it. Unless it's old age or, cancer or some kind of unpreventable illness, in many cases, when you talk about something like this, personal habits or lifestyle, he should have taken care of himself. There's some mitigation at least in that, but in this case, there's not, because it's fucking ridiculous. Through no fault of his own, he's minutes from his house, from the farm where they all live, the family all lives. You can, see everybody in the goddamn family. I think the way I've seen everything laid out, they all live there on the farm. And minutes from there, taking his kids to school, or not to school, but to cheerleading practice or whatever at the school. And some fucking woman, girl, whatever, this was not, they weren't on the interstate. People can't picture Laurel County and Sandy Fork and, Delaware. It's rural. It was a 2-lane road, probably they may have been the only traffic. Who the fuck knows? And the woman, just for some unknown reason, crosses over from her lane, cross the middle lane, hits him head on. Boom. And she's dead, so we won't get a explanation from her ass over this. I hope maybe they found a cell phone laying around, because if they do a alcohol content test and that comes up negative, nobody can fucking exist without texting on the phone in the car anymore. But nevertheless, so both of his daughters are still in the hospital, and I mean, it's not like people are, you can't just be constantly hounding this family. Well, how are the daughters? So the last I heard was what they had posted. It was a day ago that one was in surgery, back surgery, which doesn't sound good. And the other one was stable, but still in, critical condition or whatever. But just taking them to cheerleading. And I got an email. I got a number of emails, not only personal, but also to my website. But this from, I don't know this guy named Scott, but he's a listener, and he's from Laurel County or Sussex County, Laurel, Delaware. I said Laurel County a few minutes ago. Whatever the case. Scott, from up there in Sussex County. He wrote, I can truly say that our little community has never been so heartbroken than to hear the news of Jay's passing. Schools and businesses are closed. They closed the school district for the day in honor of them, because of what Jay and his family meant up there. But schools and businesses are closed. Social media is exclusively an outpouring of love for Jamin Pugh and his family. Jay was a frequent sighting out and around Sussex County, Delaware. I've never met a more friendly and down-to-earth human being in my entire life. It didn't matter who you were, what color your skin was, or your sexual preference. Jay was a friendly face to all. I was proud to call him friend and look to him as an example of what a father should be. I can only hope to be half the father that Jay was to his children. He was an A-plus father up until the very end, as he was killed taking his little girls to cheerleading practice. Our community will never be the same after this horrible tragedy, but he will never be forgotten around these parts. Jay Briscoe was a legend, and his memory will live on forever. This guy meant so much to the people up there that knew him, not even because he was a wrestler. They knew him. It's a small town, a small area up there. We used to make, jokes about Sandy Fork, Delaware on Ring of Honor television and the number one sons of Sandy Fork. But it's true. It's Delaware sounds like it's in the Northeast and et cetera. And there are obviously big city elements, Wilmington, but this is as rural as you can get. And Jay, he was, I didn't even realize to the extent he was involved till I read some of the articles. And God, Mike Johnson, again, on pwinsider.com, did a great piece that you need to look up. But Jay was coaching to his kids, his son, who wasn't in the accident, thank goodness, but was coaching his kids' sports teams and helped out at the school there. And not only that, but it wasn't a rib. When we talked all those times on Ring of Honor television, going back to when I was there 10, 12 years, 13, 14 years ago, whatever it was, of the Briscoe family, they had that RV, that giant RV that they would drive to the Manhattan Center for the big matches in New York because their mother and their father and the sister, their cousins, kids, they always had their family around them. And they would turn down plane tickets to be able to, drive and bring the family that had Papa Briscoe, their dad. I love that fucking guy. Had supported them from the time he helped teach them how to themselves, how to wrestle at first in the backyard before they ever got any training. And that's something that we knock self-trained wrestlers because of the wide variety of self-trained wrestlers that you can tell. And the ones that don't ever seek any training after that or don't take criticism or don't take advice or whatever the case. These guys were self-trained, but they fit none of that other category. They were Bobby Eatons because they saw it and they loved it and they could naturally do the movements. And somehow they were also able to translate it into figuring out how to fucking work once that they got around people who could, and they osmosised that too. But as past being wrestlers, we'll get to that shortly. I can't imagine what's going on with the family because of how, if you found anybody in the wrestling business that was more in love with and loved and wrapped up in their family, it would be the Briscoe. There couldn't be anybody more. So, and you've seen, I don't know when, it looked like a head of state would have passed away on Twitter from everybody currently in the wrestling business or that's ever been in a locker room with them or involved with anything to do with Jay's career. You can tell when people are just, oh, we're sorry something happened. No, everybody is torn up. And that's, that's hard to find. And it's more than like some legend from goddamn Attitude Era was gone. It's even though Jay was not on national television, everybody that interacted with the fans that have seen the Briscoes are broken up, and the people who've worked with them, and everybody that's interacted with them. And so I don't really know which direction to go with this from here, except that it's when something like that happens through no fault of anybody's, doing a completely routine, wonderful thing that they are dedicated to doing for their children. Help me figure out a direction here.
Well, I want to talk more about the man because you got to know him, and his family because you got to know them. But let's go back to the beginning, because in the early days of Ring of Honor, there were some names that were kind of indie superstars, and then there were a couple names that stood out because of the name Briscoe. Who are these guys calling themselves Briscoe? It's a big name to, even though there's an E at the end, it's a big name to stand up to. And when I first started seeing Ring of Honor, and they were very young, they didn't have hair. I mean, they were very young, but they stood out. And like you said, and I never even thought about the Bobby Eaton comparison, but the movement, the way their bodies moved in the ring, whether they were doing crazy stuff or just the basic stuff, especially as they got older, it really stood out. What were your first impressions of them? Because you were in Ring of Honor, what, 2003, 2004?
It was 2004. And
for the Midnight Express reunion, you started doing it, yeah.
Yes, well, I think I had even done maybe the first Ring of Honor show before the Midnight reunion, but Gabe, nevertheless, Gabe had, Sapolsky had called me, and he had these young kids, and he wanted to know if I would come up and make a show. I can't even remember, was it Dayton, Ohio? Because that was the closest they ever got to Louisville, or maybe I went to Philly the first, I don't know. But he said, these kids I've got, they're young, but they're good. They're going to be good. And I'd like you to manage them. We're going to put our belts on them. What? Okay. And he told me the Briscoe brothers, and I laughed, right? I'm thinking Jack and Jerry, and okay. And there was an element of roll my eyes at the Briscoes, just the idea of the name, but okay, whatever. And I went and did, and again, what tremendous kids with tremendous attitudes. But again, then Mark would have been 17 and Jay would have been 19 maybe, or, right before those birthdays, whatever the case. And like you said, they had no hair. They had crew cuts, and they looked like shit. And I mean that in the nicest way, because they didn't look like anything. I think they were amateur wrestlers. I think they were still wearing the shoulder strap thing, like just singlets and boots and crew cuts and no beards and just teenage kids. And I was like, well, okay. But then when they got in the ring, and even though they were, you know what? And God, this has been a bad couple days for me, because I'll fucking digress for a second. Dark Side of the Ring was here yesterday at the castle. It's no secret they're going to have season 4. And I was talking about other people that I've known or worked with in the past that are gone. So it's been a great time for that. But another subject was Terry Gordy, that I made some comments on as in relation to something that they're doing. And I said, well, I first saw him when he was 16 years old. And he was big and he had the size and he could do the shit, but he was kind of klutzy because he was 16 years old. But he was a puppy with big paws, right? The Briscoes were puppies with big paws. Do they say that in New Jersey, Brian?
I'm sure someone does, yes.
Somebody probably does, but a puppy with big paws, in down south, you see that he's going to be a big dog, right? He's got big paws. He's going to grow into it. They were puppies with big paws. Because nobody at that point, I mean, how could they, for fuck's sake? They're teenagers. They hadn't been around enough people that knew to explain, okay, you can do all this stuff, but when should you do it and how should you do it, and don't step on each other's stuff, right? Just typical stuff that when guys are green and they're teenagers. And so at the time, but anyway, I enjoyed them as people, and you could tell they could do the shit, right? they just, again, had no look. And who have I said is the best looking, most real gimmick, not only in fucking tag team wrestling, but maybe in all of wrestling today? Who have I been saying it for several years now? The fucking Briscoes. They went from fucking tights and, faces. Yeah, there they are with no hair, no beard, no whatever the fuck, to the best looking fucking most real thing in the wrestling business. So it can happen.
And you could really make an argument, and I don't know if you should say an argument or just a statement. Despite the success that FTR's had in the ring, and of course, with critical acclaim the last year, despite even what the biggest Young Bucks fan thinks of them in terms of actual tag teams, the best tag team of the last 20 years is probably the Briscoes.
Well, I try to explain it like the FTR are technically the best tag team in the ring, I think, in the business. As far as professional wrestling, tag team wrestling, execution of things, even psychology of it, I've said the only fault they have is when they fucking get overconfident in their opponents and run off and leave them, right? Otherwise than that, they're flawless. But as far as a look and as far as promos, which is part of the package, the Briscoes were stronger in that category, obviously. And so it's a 1-2 fucking situation, I think. But as I've said, the Briscoes were perfect in look and perfect in sound and fantastic in the ring. So they might even had the knot. We'll not litigate it right now. But from that period of time in 2004 and 2005, I was working with Gabe on different shows, and I managed them several times. And like I said, as people are wonderful. And they were respectful to everybody in the business, but especially to learning shit and to taking advice and whatever.
I was going to ask you about that because we hear a lot nowadays, and every veteran that comes out of, AEW will say a lot of these guys, or all of these guys, or most of these guys don't want advice. They don't seek it out, but they certainly don't want it. What were these guys like? What were the Briscoes like when they were young in terms of taking advice?
The opposite. And it would be like a yes, sir. I had to tell them a number of times early on, please don't call me sir. I'm old enough as it is. But, no, they wanted to know, and that's why they learned. And then I'll forget to say this later, so I'll say it now because it's not chronological. But the last several times I've dealt with them, they're doing the same thing that we were. They've learned, and they're trying to help other guys, and or pitch in and say, hey, blah blah blah. Not in a way like do this and do that, but hey, brother, because Jay was always somebody tweeted the first time I met him. I asked him, it may have been Generico. Said, what do you guys want to do? And Jay said, hey, fuck it, let's go out there and fucking kill it. He would, and he'll be excited to help do that with other talent also. So okay, but anyway, and that's from in those early years. Yes, puppies with big paws. Did I ever dream they were going to look like this 18 years later? Whatever. No, but they. At the same time, then I left Ring of Honor for 3 years because of the TNA situation. I was with them and Ring of Honor, and the TNA pulled their talent. And I've explained this. I had a different contract, but I couldn't fucking show up. They can't get Samoa Joe and AJ Styles. They'd have booed me out of the building. But there was no breakup. So I went back in 2009, and it's 5 years later, and now the big pause, now the Briscoes, all of a sudden, they've picked up everything. I mean, they didn't look exactly like they look today. I don't think they were as ripped. And I don't think Jay had the dreadlocks yet, but they had a look. And their matches, not only were they doing all the shit that they were doing before, but they were exciting and they made more sense, and they'd come along. And I was like, oh, them boys have grown up. And it was exciting because you could, not having followed everything they were doing for 3 or 4 years, and then boom, see them again, the difference was astounding, and it was so much more positive for the better, right? And that's when, I mean, obviously, at first Adam Pearce was the booker, and yeah, the Briscoes are figured in. The Briscoes were always figured in. I'm not saying that I was the the only proponent they had. And then when Delirious got to book, yes, the Briscoes are figured in. But when Sinclair bought the company, there was a lot of great talent in Ring of Honor at the time, but I thought the Briscoes were two of the 4 or 5 most important people for television because they were so visual and they were so different and they were so real.
Can we stop for 1 second just to recap a little of their history? They've been working, if not exclusively, predominantly for Ring of Honor from the beginning of their career up until this point. Ring of Honor was a videotape business or a DVD business. Eventually they had the HD Net show. And then with the Sinclair purchase, they got TV on Sinclair's syndicated network. So the Briscoes really had no exposure to, other than shooting promos for a video camera for a DVD release. They didn't have much exposure to doing any TV at all.
No, and that's part of the reason why that I was excited about Ring of Honor getting on Sinclair, because a lot of those guys had not had much or any television exposure, so they hadn't really been ruined in terms of people's mind as preconceived notions or whatever. And, even though they had only been doing videos, they'd still been talking, because Gabe did promos and everybody, Ring of Honor did promos even when they didn't have television, because the videos had interviews too, and the blah, blah, blah. And then the website came along. So they'd had some practice, but at the same time, Mark and Jay were just being Mark and Jay. And, they didn't yell and scream and threaten to bash people's heads in the locker room, but the interplay between the two of them were, and then it got to the point where I especially helped them flesh it out in Sinclair, or encouraged them to flesh it out, where Mark did the fills, Jay's doing the main part of the promo, and then Mark comes in with those classic fucking things that Mark wrote all of his shit, because how do you write that, right? And sometimes they'd say shit in the locker room, and that's why I would say, wait, remember it, or I'll write it down, say it on a promo, because no, it wasn't like we were writing for them. We were just encouraging them how to do themselves on television. And so that was the thing. And from the start with, obviously with Sinclair, the Briscoes were, as I said, were always figured in. And that's why even like Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin had WWE exposure on television and with Kurt Angle and blah, 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 but they've been gone for a couple years. They hadn't been beaten into powder, and they could still go in the ring. So I've got them involved specifically so they could work with the Briscoes, and we managed to get a multiple dynamic out of it, because at first people were thrilled to see Haas and Benjamin because they were names. And then when they started fucking with the, people that they liked from Ring of Honor, then they kind of were heels. And then we had the Briscoes for a while turn heel, because they said, fuck it, we got screwed, and they would do this. We got screwed, so we're going to fuck everybody up.
The Kings of Wrestling were in the mix too. You had a great tag team division there.
And there again is even before Sinclair, because we lost Hero and Claudio right when we were getting Sinclair television. But the HD Net shows, were out there. But get the Honor Club, for fuck's sake, everybody, because a lot of these matches are on there. But they had 2 with Hero and Claudio and old Shane Hagedorn, their manager, Kings of Wrestling. One was in Toronto in 2011. This may have been either before or right after. I think it's right after the Sinclair purchase, but it had been booked before. But it was the Briscoes against Hero and Claudio in a goddamn, I don't know if we called it a Toronto street fight. I don't know if Toronto's noted for their fucking throwdowns up there, but it was a fucking anything goes. It was a street fight match because it was built to in the fucking angle for weeks, months and months. And not only did they do all of their shit, because Hero and Claudio, at the time, I was comparing to the Midnight Express in terms of who's the best in-ring heel team in the business, because they could work the young guy style And then they could work a fucking pro wrestling tag team match. And Hero was such a fucking, I mean this in the most loving way, a wrestling nerd about all styles that he could do everything. And, Claudio learned a lot of what he learned from Hero. But anyway, so they were having great tag team matches. We have the street fight match in Toronto. And I gave them some of the old territory street fight stuff that nobody had done at that point, 20 years or whatever the fuck it was. And they loved it. And not only the Briscoes, as I said, Hero loved all that shit. He was receptive, but they were able to work that into their shit. And, we did because a lot of times they would get so excited, the Briscoes would, that Mark would do something big while Jay was doing something big over on the other side of the ring or out on the floor at the same time. And I said, don't not do your shit. Just don't do it at the same time as the other guy. Slow to build here, make this pay off. People will pop more if you just set it up and, then foil it later, whatever. So they did the thing where they tied, I believe it was probably Jay. They tied basically got a rope and tied his neck around the ring post where he was choking and couldn't breathe. And he's tied, he can't get away. And then they're double teaming his brother. And finally, I think one of the ring crew guys comes over the railing and pulls a pocket knife out of his goddamn pocket and cuts Jay loose while he can still fucking breathe, and he slumps to the ground. That was taken from an actual real life incident where they tied the babyface to the ring post and a fan from the front row came over the rail with a goddamn knife and cut him loose. And then, so Jay comes out from under the ring with the goddamn fire extinguisher to fucking blind the heels and start to come back, and everybody's bleeding, and then they broke a table. And the fucking place went ballistic. I loved that match because it was Ring of Honor, and it was a Toronto crowd, and Ted Reeve Arena held, 1,200? We sold that one out, believe it or not, folks. And they loved that shit, and it was part modern wrestling chaos and part, old school psychology that these guys got. And then the other one, were you there for Papa Briscoe's 6-man in the Manhattan Center?
I don't think so. Every single Ring of Honor show you ever asked me to come to, they were on the show. I thought about that the other day. Every single one of those shows, obviously.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't know if I saw that. I may have. I was going to ask you, whose idea was it? When did he first start getting involved in, obviously they weren't doing TV before that, but whose idea was it to get him involved in that stuff? Because he was great.
You know me. And I thought, well, goddamn, because these guys wanted to make wrestling as emotional and meaningful as possible. Like I said, Hero and Claudio and the Briscoes. And the Briscoes were known by the Ring of Honor fans and by everybody who knew them as being so involved with their family. And it was not uncommon for their family to be around. So on the HDNet show, and goddamn, I hope that, I'm pretty sure it was, I don't want to lie, but I'm pretty sure that it was either going to air on or we were shooting it on or something. It was around the time of Father's Day. Okay. Cause this was probably the insemination of the idea. And well, Papa Briscoe, the Briscoe's father, who by the way is, if you haven't seen him, is twice as jacked up. At the time he was, I guess still, but he was 30 or 40 pounds bigger than either Mark or Jay. He looks like Bullet Bob Armstrong if he came from Delaware. Big arms and a fucking gray hair, and he can cut a promo because he's a wrestling fan too. And he's got a voice. Anybody saw the fight at the chicken farm between Mark and Jay? He was the referee, right? He was, all right, boys, get it out of your system. So anyway, there is fucking Papa Briscoe at ringside, Father's Day, whatever the case may be. And Shane Hagedorn, the obnoxious manager of the Kings of Wrestling. God, it's been 12 years. I can't even remember exactly what was said, but the point is he made an ill comment about the Briscoes and their parentage to Papa Briscoe's face, and Papa Briscoe slapped him naked and hid his clothes. He just fucking slapped the shit out of Hagedorn. And here comes the Kings of Wrestling, and I believe it was Hero that hit that fucking elbow on Papa Briscoe, and down he went. And as Gary Hart would say, the shit, as they say, brother, was on. And now it was a personal blood feud between the Briscoes and the Kings of Wrestling. And long story, folks, again, the Honor Club, I don't know what they got on there, but I'm going to try to check out these two matches because I've been thinking about them and I haven't seen them in 12 years. But we went to New York, and God, was it the Manhattan Center or was that in Hammerstein? I can't remember which. But it was a 6-man tag with the Briscoes and Papa Briscoe against the Kings of Wrestling and Shane Hagedorn. And the Ring of Honor fans online from Bratislava and Yugoslavia and all points south of Brazil were just up in arms. They're they're putting their father in a we wanted a 6-star match from the Tokyo Dome. This horse shit. God damn it, this old Southern wrestling bullshit. We can tell Cornette's there. And when we came to the night of the match, which, by the way, whichever venue it was in the Manhattan Center was full. Every seat was full. And those people in New York, the hardest audience, supposedly for smart fans, they came unglued by the time they got to the finish of that fucking thing because and first they did not give a shit for Papa Briscoe, even when he walked out and they saw what he looked like, that he had come ready for bear. But by the time that he hit the fucking Road Warrior Hawk clothesline off the top rope onto one of those bastards that had to take his stiff shit, the place was coming unglued for Papa Briscoe. He put the work in. They worked out a match, and Papa did his shit, and the people loved it, and the Briscoes triumphed. And that was another one of my favorite matches because it was real. It was lit. This is what the guy helped teach his sons how to wrestle in their backyard of their farm, and now they're in a feature match on a sold-out Ring of Honor show, and we had to make Papa Briscoe take a payoff. And we gave it, and by the statute of limitations run out, I got money and we gave it to him in cash under the fucking table as a thank you, and he tried to give it back to us. And he said, oh, no. I said, what the fuck? And they brought the whole family up in the RV. And you've never seen grins on anybody's faces like that. I love, now that I think about it, that, I mean, it wasn't like we were bringing Papa Briscoe in to be a goddamn recurring, contender for the title. But that they got to team with their father in fucking New York from a sellout in the Manhattan Center or wherever it was, whichever room.
Final Battle 2010, Manhattan Center.
There you go. That was, that was probably one of the greatest nights of their life, and I was just liking it because it was great old-fashioned wrestling. But those are two of my favorite matches that they had. But anyway. And then, what was it? Obviously, I was gone when Jay won the world title. And I was all in favor of that because he was a fantastic single also, but my fondness for tag team wrestling, I just always preferred the brothers together because they were, again, can you say Jay was the best in the world as a single? In a lot of ways, maybe yes, especially when he was the champion there, but they were definitely the best tag team, at that time. And now with FTR, as we said, 1 and 2, depending on your preference. So, and that's, as a matter of fact, they did a thing with Sinclair, Mark Davis, the guy who was the head of production for Ring of Honor. And, well, not only the early days when he was the production for Ring of Honor, but then when they actually hired people and got a department, he was the head of that too. But we put him on the bus one time on the RV with the camera, and they did an hour TV special on the road with the Briscoes and at the farm and with the family and the whole 9 yards. Because that was the point I was going to make, and I never got to a little while ago. they were so important for television because it was so different. And they were so good at everything. It related the promos and the gimmick and the visuals of having the farm and not having to work any of that. And just the things that on the bus with the family, whatever, that they were always, as far as I was concerned, going to be figured into whatever we did on television with Sinclair, you know, because that was kind of the epitome of Ring of Honor was supposed to be, where the young, you know, wild ass personalities and or badass wrestlers or fighters that don't do the phony showbiz stuff want to go. And they were perfect for that. But at the same time, and you know what? It was, God damn it, I can't remember now whether it was under Kerry's administration or under Sinclair's administration. But despite how much we loved them and wanted to depend on them and the whole 9 yards, the time where they were going to get a look by the WWE and Jay sent the tweet. And at that time, we had heard from them, obviously, that they had an opportunity. And it wasn't like that they were dangling already a giant contract in front of them. But as I recall, the way it was relayed to me, they were going to bring them to Florida for a week and give them a tryout. The WWE I'm talking about. And I said, well, that doesn't sound like a fucking brass band welcome with open arms, but to the credit of whoever administration it was, I think it may have still been Kerry, but it might have been Sinclair, but we were going to, no, it was probably still Kerry. But we were going to let them out of whatever we had with them if they had an opportunity, because everybody wanted Mark and Jay to have the biggest contract or the most success or whatever that they could have. And because obviously, and I'll admit it in a guilty fashion, when I heard that the tweet had caused them to rescind the invitation, I was kind of relieved, because I didn't think that the WWE, and history has probably borne me out on this, I didn't think the WWE would let the Briscoes be the Briscoes, and with the Briscoes not being the Briscoes, I was afraid it would all be for naught, and they would have ended up happier staying in Ring of Honor. But I did remark to Delirious at the time, I believe, that it was the first $1 million tweet ever sent in history, because you couldn't. Well, I don't know, because then there was also the comment from the WWE one time, I can't remember which one of the brain trust it was, that the Briscoes were not cosmetically pleasing, which was the exact reason why they should be on fucking television. Because as we mentioned with the Young Rock trying to recreate the superstars of the past, nobody looks like that. And they had a look, not everybody's look. So
can we talk about the tweet for a second? Just because so much of everything after that point, at least in terms of wrestling, it kind of goes back to
you know what? Hold on. Hold the thought on the tweet, because I got one more story to tell, because then we'll talk about the tweet, because I'm going to probably get cranky about that. I went back after I was gone. That made a lot of fucking sense.
Is this a letter, or are you saying this?
No. God damn it. When I went back to work with Ring of Honor in conjunction with the Crockett Cup in, what was that, 2018 or 19? They did at Charlotte, North Carolina. They did the pay-per-view out of the new arena up there around Concord, or wherever the fuck it was. And in the first round, it was the Briscoes versus the Rock and Roll Express. And I was doing commentary on the show, but they also asked me to produce that match, which I was happy to. And so I'd left at the end of 2012, and there's 7 years later, I come back, and there's the Briscoes again. Well, and of course, big smile and big grins. But now, as much of a difference as I'd seen, from 2005 to 12 now. There's multiple time more now. They've got the whole gimmick is blossoming out, and Jay's ripped, and both of them. Jay had some serious knee injuries, and I think Mark has had a few things, but I don't know how they were able to stay in the shape they were in. But they did that shit, and it looked like it would kill you, but they could do it. And anyway, they had the whole package together, and they were really they looked like ass kickers. And now they're working with the Rock and Roll Express. And to be honest, I mean, they loved it because they looked at it like if a baseball player of today got a chance to play against or with Mickey Mantle, they'd just be thrilled, even if Mickey couldn't hit the ball as far, right? You know what I'm saying? Well, in this case, I thought, well, it's the Ring of Honor fans. I don't want them to be too hard on Ricky and Robert, but they were there in large part because they needed to sell tickets in Charlotte, and Ricky and Robert were a primary reason why they sold any live event tickets in Charlotte. But I didn't want the people to think, oh, goddamn, now, because there's the Briscoes, right? And there's Ricky and Robert at that age, in this day and age. So I didn't want them to have to go too long. I left it up to Jay and Mark at first, and I was like, maybe we can do, something short where you jump and blah, 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 and then they get some hope. No. We can do it. We all four of us, we want to have this match. And they were all fired up to have a fucking match, and they did, and the people live loved it. And it actually got quite good reviews, even from the more harsher critics on the internet. But now Jay and Mark are obviously not leading the Rock and Roll Express, but they had learned enough and they had come along enough that they knew how to feed those guys and make it easier for them to be the rock and roll they used to be in front of the town they were the most popular in. And that, again, just professional all the way. So that's, I guess, almost 4 years ago, whatever is the last time that I got to see him or work with him. But it was just amazing, the transformation through the years that you could see when you bopped in at different points in their career. And again, with Jay 38 and Mark, 36. And if they hadn't, broken their bodies down to where they still look that good and can do that shit at this point, they had years more left. But
isn't that amazing? They were there at the very beginning of Ring of Honor. When you think about that early class of Ring of Honor stars, Danielson, Samoa Joe, Punk, AJ Styles, whoever you think about, they're all either in their early 40s or getting up there. They're still in their 30s. Jay Briscoe was not even 40 yet. I mean, what an incredible career for someone not even 40.
Well, and and we'll talk about this tweet in a second, but I don't want to act like they never went anywhere but fucking Ring of Honor. They've been to Japan, and they've worked a number of independents, but a lot of the reason, and especially during the Sinclair era, and they eventually worked up to where for the few years that Sinclair was willing to spend some money, I believe they were doing all right. But at some points, they liked the Ring of Honor contract because they had a landscaping business and they worked on the legitimate family chicken farm. And sometimes they didn't want to go to Japan, or they turned down maybe some opportunities to do other things because they didn't want to be away from the family that long for that. And they liked working for Ring of Honor with their friends and also being based out of home and having a lot of time at home for their other businesses and their family. They weren't concerned necessarily. I mean, I'm sure it would be lovely, but they weren't in all cases more concerned about where's the money rather than where's my family fit in, and how can I contribute here the best. And they knew that they were important to Ring of Honor like Ring of Honor was important to them.
And on that topic, you brought up Mickey Mantle before, and it's not a perfect comparison, but if you look at Ring of Honor history, the early days with Gabe and Feinstein, the Carrie Silken era, into the Sinclair era, into Tony Khan, they're the glue. And Mickey Mantle did something that's one of the most romanticized things to do in baseball, because it rarely happens anymore, especially. he wore one uniform his whole career. Just the Yankee uniform. It's painful sometimes to see Babe Ruth in his last days as a player wearing a Boston Braves uniform. And in a sense, like you brought up, it's a shame they didn't get that WWE opportunity. But on the other hand, it's not like their work in Ring of Honor wasn't great. And we did get an incredible body of work that's consistent. From beginning to end, there's a story there with Ring of Honor and the Briscoes. Like I said, they're the glue of Ring of Honor.
You know, I actually, until you made the baseball analogy, which I wouldn't have thought of, yeah, you know, that is, where can you find any other, I guess, single wrestler or tag team entity, whatever, that's started and finished? And obviously, Mark's not finished, but you know what, as the tag team, the Briscoe started and finished in one company, even though through several different administrations, and grew with that and went from, you know, pimply faced teenage kids to the best in the business at what they were doing. That's amazing.
They didn't get the WWE opportunity. And of course, we talked, and I encourage people to go check out the YouTube channel. We talked about the tweet recently because there was the story that there was an executive with Warner Brothers Discovery who did not want them on any programming because of that tweet. And I want to say, I think I saw Sean Ross Sapp tweet out earlier. It's amazing they wouldn't let him on the air for something so many years ago that he has apologized for. Yet the show after Dynamite was a man who just slapped his wife, hosting a show with people slapping each other.
Yes. And did you see also that it's being stated that they taped after Dynamite which is last night, this is the Thursday morning as we record this. But after Dynamite last night, they taped a tribute to Jay Briscoe that will air on the Ring of Honor Honor Club, and kudos to Tony for doing that. But the reporting was also accompanied by that they were not allowed to make the Dynamite show a tribute to Jay Briscoe like they had done to Brody Lee by the same unnamed TBS or Warner Brothers Discovery executive. Did you see that?
I did see that. And, you know, we're just two friends talking here, letting people listen. I'm not proud of this, but I did have the thought Tuesday night. That executive, if that decision hadn't been made, who knows if he would have been there? Who knows if he would have flown out that night to go to Dynamite? And I regret, I'm saying that out loud just because it has been eating me up a little bit, thinking about all that. And I want to talk about the tweet, but let me mention this. The wrestler Effie, who we've talked about a little bit in the past, does over-the-top stuff. He's openly gay, and his character, obviously, is also openly gay and does some explicit sexual stuff at times that's not for our taste. But here's what he tweeted out. Jay Briscoe showed me respect and love when everyone told me he wouldn't. If you knew Jay, you knew he would uplift everyone in that locker room regardless of whatever world they came to wrestling from. The best. Rest easy, brother. And I think it's important to anyone still holding on to anything from that tweet. It was regrettable, it was ignorant, and there's no signs of anything after that point that shows that this was a hateful guy. And I said, the thing with the executive has been bothering me just because, I've been thinking a lot about it, and I have. And, but anyway, back to you.
Well, but we talked about it when we, as you said, we talked about the tweet earlier in a previous show. Besides the fact that he apologized for it over and over, and you can see the type of person he is, and that everybody felt he was, it hit at that point, and I'm not going to go on a soapbox about this, but one of the comments he made was, he said, I was crusading for the Lord back then. Indoctrination of religious beliefs can damage people's perceptions in some cases, that's all I'll say, and it was also hitting him with his kids, because the whole gay marriage thing was at the crux of it, because that was being discussed. And what does Jay care more about than anything else in life? His kids. And he doesn't want anything bad happen to his kids that are told to him will happen by the fucking authority figures or whatever the fuck that he was listening to on the news. So past all that, I've got to admit now, I rescind everything I said about, well, is this really a unnamed Warner Brothers executive, or is this jealousy on the part of some of the EVPs? But not even they, in this situation, could be that fucking asshole-ish of assholes. That before I do, oh, maybe it's jealousy, but no, now they would certainly not, in this situation, stand in the way of anything. So this legitimately has to be that some unnamed piece of shit, who I would love to get the name of, and I promise you, if anybody can tell me his name, I'll tell a million people real fucking quick. I can promise you that. But whoever this fucking guy is that has never said anything wrong.
You don't know.
Or girl, I'm sorry. Executive or executress that has never said anything bad or done anything wrong or said anything regrettable in public, or it is perfect in every way, who works for a network that has never had a convicted felon on the wrestling program, Nick Gage, who has never had a convicted felon, not only a bank robber, but now a rapist, Mike Tyson, past the wrestling program. If we're doing criminal background checks on everybody, let's go to the rest of the programming. You just mentioned the network that doesn't air a television program from documented wife slapper Dana White about a bunch of mouth-breathing, knuckle-dragging fucking meatheads slapping a piss out of each other over and over until one of them gets brain damage and the other one wins less cash prizes than I get selling comic books in a month. They don't do that. I don't even watch any of the rest of these goddamn shitty programs that TBS and TNT broadcast these days, or I'm sure I could find some things wrong with people on them too. So how fucking cretinous of a goddamn inhuman piece of shit, slime from the puddle of ooze of the fucking pits of hell do you have to be, unnamed woman or man, that would not even let them show highlights and tributes to a guy who got killed taking his kids to cheerleading practice because of a mean fucking tweet? Fuck you. I'd goddamn double dog dare somebody in the sound of my voice or the fucking reach of this show to find out that name, and I promise you, I will broadcast it to the goddamn world along with any contact info that I can find out, and I would love the motherfucker to sue me. But in the meantime, why don't everybody write TBS and TNT and go, hey, fuck you? What kind of fucking pricks you employing over there, now that I think about it? But anyway, yeah, that's apparently now I can absolve the Young Bucks of any jealousy responsibility for this. It apparently really is some piece of shit that ought to be drug across goddamn razor blades and dipped in a vat of alcohol. But let's get back to this.
You know, the last year, everyone's been raving about FTR, and rightly so. It's easy to forget at times that there was another team in those 3 matches in Ring of Honor. They didn't just hold their own. They're as good as anyone. Yeah. And I think because FTR gets all the attention, because of all the backstage drama and everything that everyone knows is happening.
At least every once in a while, the company they work for does put them on television. So they get a little more attention. But yes, I mean, it's not even close that their best matches, both teams' best matches, were with each other. But yes, FTR couldn't do that with anybody else, because if they could, they'd have done it with somebody else. And they've had different kinds of matches, but not that. Not the essence of wrestling.
You know, it's weird. I've been thinking so much lately about mortality, just with everything I've gone through with my father. And, you start thinking about things like your family, your kids, how are you going to take care of them? And, oh my God, what happens if, everyone, if everyone's out and something happens? You start thinking about all these things. And, I think it's so tough when it's an auto accident. And there's been a few occurrences in wrestling history where, not to say that like the drug deaths and all these different deaths aren't bad, but when it's someone who, again, just won the tag team titles, just had 3 amazing matches, one will probably win match of the year somewhere, and that's the last we see of them. I mean, there is something really, like Moondog Mayne, they just announced on TV one day, oh yeah, he died in a car accident, and you never see him again. It's something, I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this. I don't have the exact words. I think you know what I'm saying. But the car accident in wrestling is just an extra painful one, I think.
Well, see, honestly, that used to be before steroids became a thing. That used to be the expected manner of death that wasn't old age for a wrestler. When I first got into business, it's not everybody sat down and said, okay, kid, now you're probably going to die in a car wreck. But no, just from history and just from hearing guys' stories and just from what happened and being around, you knew that if you didn't die of old age or something, reasonably close to of some ill health, it was a car wreck, because that's how wrestlers died, because they were always in fucking cars. And an offshoot of that, Bobby Shane in a private plane, same concept. Not most of the guys could afford the plane. And to the point where one of the first things I remember, when I just first got the photography job in Louisville was Sam Bass, Pepe Lopez, and Frank Hester. And that led to, the guys talking about shit. And, that was because guys didn't OD back then, and nobody had a heart attack when they were 40 because nobody had been on steroids and blah, blah, blah. So, but you were literally every day of your life in a car for 200, 300, 400, 500 miles or more. And remember, I figured out I've been in a car since I got into wrestling, and most of it driving, but in a car, 2 million miles, give or take however much. And, something's bound to happen, which is why I completely do not miss any of it and don't even drive across town anymore, because you never know about these fucking morons. But that used to be the thing that would happen unless, as I said, it was old age or nearabouts. But that's all changed because now not a lot of guys drive, and there's no territories, and everything's changed. And all the other things that they've done in the intervening years.
Well, it's just a heartbreaking, just everything with, his kids, and just the whole thing is heartbreaking. And I really, I don't know if you saw this, another kick in the gut. The next day was Mark Briscoe's birthday.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I don't. Well, anyway, I don't, I'm sure I'll think of something else I should have said at some point. But
how are you going to remember your time around the Briscoes?
Well, it's not like I didn't like everybody else. I'm not trying to say that, but they were my favorites, I think. Just, the not only to have them working there, but also because they were always happy and, and always into something or whatever the fuck, and trying to help I enjoyed not only working with them and being around them, but the fact that they had gotten, so good from humble origins. And that's why I've been a proponent over the last couple of years. What the fuck? Their time, is not. I didn't want to say that. It wasn't that their time was running low, but that their peak athletic years, I was so hoping they'd get to be on a national television program where a lot of people could see them and they could be themselves. And obviously in WWE, that would be all fucked up. And it would be like putting the goddamn Diaz brothers in Holiday on Ice or something. It just wouldn't fit. But in AEW, they could have done their shit. And, so I've been pulling for that because I was afraid that it, might not get a chance to transpire. And apparently, again, because of the unnamed executive that I'd love to fucking get a finger on. But, that's, I've, again, personally and professionally, and from everybody else's reaction, apparently I'm not alone. How could you dislike these fucking guys? It was impossible.
Well, we send our best wishes and our positive vibes to the family, and hopefully we see Mark Briscoe again wrestling at some point in the future. But with that, we will be right back with more Drive-Thru after this short commercial timeout.